Your kind isn't welcome here, too rowdy. Take your business elsewhere, the bar owner sneered, gesturing towards the door. Mark Mac Macmillan, a recently discharged Navy SEAL, stood silently, his beer untouched. He hadn't said a word, hadn't caused a ripple, just sat quietly observing. "Rowdy?" Mac finally asked, his voice low and steady. "I haven't even finished my first drink." The owner just jerked his thumb towards the exit. "Out, before I make you leave." The next afternoon, as the bar prepped for its happy hour rush, the front door swung open and in walked not one but 12 imposing figures, all with the same unmistakable bearing as Mac. If you believe loyalty runs deeper than beer taps, type respect below. Mark Mac Macmillan was trying to find his footing in a world that felt alien. After 15 years as a Navy SEAL, years of intense training, covert operations in unforgiving environments, and the unbreakable bonds of brotherhood forged in shared adversity, civilian life felt quiet. Too quiet. He was honorably discharged after his last tour, injuries finally catching up, forcing a retirement he wasn't ready for. He drifted to the coastal town of Port City, hoping the ocean air might soothe the restlessness that gnawed at him. He was staying in a small rented room above a tackle shop, trying to figure out his next move. The transition more jarring than any combat drop. He didn't look like the Hollywood stereotype of a SEAL. He wasn't overtly muscular or flashy. He was of average height, lean, with watchful grey eyes that saw everything, and a quiet, contained energy that often made him seem aloof or intense to strangers. He kept his hair short, his clothes practical and unassuming. Jeans, a plain t-shirt, a faded baseball cap. He wasn't looking for trouble or attention. He was just looking for a moment of normalcy, a quiet place to think. He'd wandered into the Salty Gull, a waterfront bar popular with locals and a rougher tourist element. It had a decent reputation for live music on weekends, but tonight, a Tuesday, it was mostly empty, just a few regulars hunched over their drinks. Mac took a seat at a small table in the corner, ordered a beer, and settled in to observe, a habit ingrained from years of needing to assess every environment. The owner of the Salty Gull, a beefy, perpetually scowling man named Vic Rizzo, prided himself on running a tight ship. His definition of tight, however, often translated to arbitrary enforcement of unwritten rules based on his mood or his perception of a patron. He had a particular dislike for what he termed military types, stemming from a minor scuffle involving some rowdy young sailors years ago that he'd overblown into a major incident in his mind. He saw them as inherently disruptive, arrogant, and prone to violence. When Mac walked in, Vic clocked him immediately. The quiet intensity, the way he scanned the room, the subtle alertness. Vic didn't see a man looking for a peaceful drink. He saw a potential problem, someone who didn't fit his preferred clientele of loud, easy-spending tourists or compliant locals. Mac had been sitting quietly for about 20 minutes, nursing his first beer, his gaze mostly fixed on the dusty nautical charts tacked to the wall, when Vic decided to act. He ambled over to Mac's table, his arms crossed, his expression already hostile. "All right, pal," Vic began, his voice unnecessarily loud in the quiet bar. "You've been sitting here staring for 20 minutes. You casing the joint or something?" Mac looked up, surprised. "Just enjoying my beer, thinking." "Thinking," Vic scoffed. "Don't like your kind of thinking in my establishment. Makes the other customers nervous." He glanced around pointedly, though the few other patrons were pointedly ignoring the exchange. "My kind?" Mac asked, his voice calm, though a warning light flickered in his grey eyes. "And what kind would that be?" Vic leaned in, his beer and cigarette breath washing over Mac. "The quiet, intense, military-looking kind. You guys are always trouble, looking for a fight, thinking you own the place. I've had enough of it. Your kind isn't welcome here. Too rowdy." Mac raised an eyebrow. "Rowdy? I haven't said a word to anyone but the bartender. I haven't moved from this table." "Doesn't matter," Vic snapped, his face reddening. "I know your type. You're all the same. I run a respectable place here. So, finish up whatever swill you're drinking and take your business elsewhere." Mac placed his beer glass down on the table with deliberate care. The injustice of it, the sheer irrational prejudice, was galling. After all he'd seen, all he'd done. To be judged and dismissed so casually by a belligerent bar owner based on nothing more than a perceived look. It was a bitter pill. "I believe," Mac said, his voice still low but now with an edge of steel that made Vic pause for a fraction of a second, "that I am a paying customer, bothering no one. I believe I have the right to finish my drink in peace." Vic's brief hesitation vanished, replaced by renewed aggression. He slammed his beefy hand on the table. "You believe wrong, buddy. This is my bar, my rules, and my rule says you're out now, before I and my bouncer—" He jerked a thumb towards a large, equally thuggish-looking man who was now watching from behind the bar. "Escort you out personally, and trust me, you don't want that." Mac looked at Vic, then at the bouncer, then back at Vic. He could, he knew, handle both of them without breaking a sweat. Years of training made that a certainty. But what would it accomplish? A messy brawl, police, trouble he didn't need, especially now trying to build a new life. It wasn't worth it. The quiet resignation settled over him again. This was civilian life, apparently, arbitrary, illogical, and often deeply unfair. He stood up slowly, pushing his chair in. He left his nearly full beer on the table. "Keep the change," he said quietly, though he hadn't paid yet. He walked towards the exit, Vic and the bouncer watching him with triumphant smirks. As he reached the door, Vic called after him, "And don't come back, you hear? We don't need your trouble." Mac didn't look back. He stepped out into the cool night air, the injustice coiling in his gut. He walked a few blocks, then stopped, leaning against a seawall, looking out at the dark water. He pulled out his phone. He didn't call the police. He didn't call a lawyer. He opened a secure messaging app, one used by his old SEAL team for discreet communication, and typed a short, simple message to his former team leader, Senior Chief Petty Officer Jake Reaper Rourke. "Salty Gull Bar, Port City. Owner, Vic Rizzo. Unwarranted ejection. Hostile to military, just FYI, Mac." He hit send. He didn't expect anything to happen, not really. It was just an FYI, a way of venting, of letting his brothers know about a particularly unpleasant encounter in a new town. He then started the long walk back to his rented room, the taste of injustice far more bitter than any beer. The next day, around 3 p.m., just as Vic Rizzo was unlocking the front door of the Salty Gull, preparing for the afternoon shift, and congratulating himself on keeping his bar clean, a large unmarked black van pulled up silently across the street. It was followed by 2 more identical vans. They parked with military precision, engines idling. Vic watched, a flicker of unease stirring. These weren't delivery trucks. The doors of the vans slid open, and figures began to emerge. Not 1 or 2, but a dozen. All men, all tall, lean, powerfully built, moving with a quiet, coordinated purpose that was utterly out of place on the sleepy waterfront street. They wore civilian clothes, jeans, t-shirts, work boots, some with baseball caps pulled low, but there was nothing civilian about their bearing. Each man carried an aura of intense focus, of contained power, like coiled springs ready to unleash. They had the same watchful eyes as Mac, the same air of quiet competence that brooked no argument. It was Mac's old SEAL team. Senior Chief Rourke, Reaper, led the way. His expression unreadable but radiating an intensity that made Vic's unease blossom into full-blown apprehension. They didn't look at the other shops or pedestrians. They crossed the street in a loose tactical formation and headed directly, silently, towards the entrance of the Salty Gull. Vic, standing in the doorway, suddenly felt very small, very exposed. He recognized the look in their eyes. He'd seen it before, briefly, in Mac the night before, just before Mac had decided to walk away. Now it was amplified 12-fold, and they weren't walking away. Senior Chief Rourke stopped directly in front of Vic Rizzo, the other 11 members of the SEAL team fanning out slightly behind him, effectively blocking the entire entrance to the Salty Gull. They didn't speak. They just stood there, their collective gaze fixed on Vic, a silent, overwhelming wall of disapproval. Vic swallowed hard, his earlier bluster gone. Can I help you, gentlemen?" he stammered, trying for a welcoming tone that came out as a nervous squeak. Reaper Rourke didn't answer immediately. He just looked at Vic, his eyes seeming to strip away every layer of Vic's bravado, leaving him feeling naked and inadequate. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken threat. The bouncer, who had just arrived for his shift and witnessed the team's arrival, wisely chose to remain near the back of the bar, suddenly very interested in polishing glasses. "Vic Rizzo?" Rourke finally asked, his voice low, calm, but carrying the unmistakable authority of a man used to giving orders that were instantly obeyed in life-or-death situations. "Yeah, that's me," Vic managed. "We understand," Rourke continued, his tone still quiet, "that you had a misunderstanding last night with one of our associates, a man named Mac." Vic's eyes darted nervously from Rourke to the other silent figures. "Misunderstanding? Look, he was being difficult. I just asked him to leave, no harm done." One of the SEALs behind Rourke, a giant of a man known only as Tank, let out a soft sound, not quite a laugh, more like the rumble of distant thunder that made Vic flinch. "No harm done," Rourke echoed, raising an eyebrow. "You insulted him. You threatened him. You ejected him from your establishment based on nothing more than your own prejudice. Is that your standard business practice, Mr. Rizzo? To disrespect a man who has served his country with more honor and integrity in one tour than you've likely shown in your entire life?" Vic started to sweat. "Now, hold on a minute. I support the troops. I got a flag out front. Sometimes you just get a bad vibe from someone, you know." "A bad vibe," Rourke repeated, his voice flat. "Interesting, because we're getting a very specific vibe from you, Mr. Rizzo, and from your establishment." He paused. "We were planning on having a team debrief here this afternoon. About 12 of us. Maybe a few more might join. We thought we'd sample your hospitality, have a few rounds, support a local business." He looked around the empty bar. "But given Mac's experience, we're reconsidering." Vic's mind raced. 12 SEALs, in his bar, for hours. The potential for profit warred with the palpable sense of intimidation. But then he saw the look in Rourke's eyes, and he knew this wasn't about selling beer. "Look," Vic said, trying a different tack, forcing a placating smile. "If it was a mistake, I apologize. To Mac, to you. Tell you what, first round's on the house for you and your associates, for the misunderstanding." Rourke's expression didn't change. "An apology to us is irrelevant, Mr. Rizzo. It's Mac you disrespected. And more than Mac, you disrespected the service, the sacrifice, the quiet dignity of a man who asked for nothing but to be treated like any other customer." He stepped a little closer. "Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Rizzo. You are going to find Mac. You are going to offer him a sincere personal apology, not for us, but for him. You will tell him he is welcome in your establishment any time, and that he will be treated with the respect he is due. Then," Rourke continued, "you are going to make a substantial, publicly acknowledged donation to the Navy SEAL Foundation in Mac's name. Consider it an investment in better community relations." Vic looked horrified at the mention of a donation. "A donation? How much are we talking about?" "Enough to make a difference," Rourke said smoothly. "Enough to show you understand the gravity of your misunderstanding. My associate here," he gestured to Doc, the team medic, who also happened to have a keen mind for figures, "will discuss the appropriate amount with you, privately." Rourke then looked past Vic into the bar. "And from now on, Mr. Rizzo, this establishment will be known as a place that honors veterans, not just with a flag out front, but with genuine respect. Understood?" Vic, thoroughly cowed, could only nod mutely. "Good," Rourke said. "Now, about that apology to Mac." He pulled out his phone. "He's expecting your call. We'll wait." For the next hour, the Salty Gull was effectively, though unofficially, under new management. While Doc had a very quiet, very persuasive conversation with Vic Rizzo in his cramped office about donation figures and community outreach, the rest of the SEAL team simply occupied the bar. They didn't order anything. They didn't make a mess. They just sat quietly at various tables, their presence an overwhelming silent statement. Regular customers who wandered in took one look, felt the atmosphere, and quickly turned around. Vic Rizzo, emerging from his office looking pale and significantly poorer, made a very heartfelt, very public phone call to Mac, apologizing profusely and inviting him back to the bar any time as an honored guest. Mac, from his small room, accepted the apology with quiet grace. The SEAL team departed as silently and efficiently as they had arrived, leaving Vic Rizzo to contemplate his new business philosophy. The Salty Gull did, in fact, make a very substantial donation to the Navy SEAL Foundation, and word spread quickly through Port City. The Salty Gull was now a vet-friendly establishment, perhaps the most vet-friendly establishment in town. Mac visited the Salty Gull a week later at Reaper Rourke's insistence. Vic Rizzo personally served him his beer, on the house, and couldn't have been more solicitous. The bouncer even nodded respectfully. Mac didn't gloat. He just enjoyed his beer in peace, a quiet smile playing on his lips. He knew his team always had his six, whether in a dusty foreign land or a run-down waterfront bar. The incident became a quiet legend among the SEALs, a reminder that sometimes the most effective operations required no weapons, just unwavering loyalty and the undeniable presence of a dozen of America's finest. Because brotherhood doesn't end with discharge, and when you mess with one SEAL, you might just find his entire team showing up to politely, but very firmly, recalibrate your understanding of respect. Subscribe to my channel if you believe in the unbreakable bonds of brotherhood, and that true heroes always have each other's backs.